Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. Today, we are diving into the tournament and league organizing side of esports, right? So, what everything goes in behind the scenes when you play in all these great tournaments and events and leagues. Today, we're joined by MishMash Gaming and Tyler, the CEO and founder. So, go ahead, Tyler, introduce yourself. Tell us your background, what sparked your interest in esports, and how that took you into creating MishMash Gaming and where you are now.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Kyle. I appreciate it. Looking forward to being here, part of Spin today. So basically, MishMash was basically started in my apartment. Bunch of guys playing Siege, right? Siege comes out. It's a new shooter. You got to get it. I got it. I wasn't very good, in all honesty, and this was on PS4 way back in the day, almost 3 years ago now. So I decided to start hosting. From what I could see personally, there wasn't much competition going around on console. And it's become a little understandable now that I'm very deep in it. But so I decided I'd try and give back to the community, and it all took off from there, man. From there, we started doing tournaments, and then once the tournaments started to build up and we built a bit of a community, we dove into leagues, and then we jumped consoles, we added Xbox, and now we're looking at adding some other pretty cool things. So it's been great so far.
Awesome. Yeah, all the things that I hear about you guys behind the scenes, it is incredible, and I hope that success translates to something really big over the next few months, especially a game like Siege and Ubisoft. They're taking a whole new format. So we can go ahead and talk about that a little bit. We were talking a little bit before, but you're from Canada, right? MishMash is based in Canada. So tell me about all these new changes and your takes on them, and what you feel like, is it good for the scene? Is it hopefully good for the scene? Do you see some positive growth in the future? Is it going to take some time? So what's your take on it? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's great to see. I mean, especially Siege specifically, it was built in Canada, right, at Ubisoft Montreal. So I think it's great for the scene to dedicate a portion in Canada, right, all throughout Canada. So right now there's 4 teams competing in Pro League that were all through open qualifiers. Congratulations to all of them. And we'll have 8 teams in Challenger League as well. So it's great. I mean, I think at this point right now, it's still considered a grassroots program for esports. Because it's not going to be the level of the U.S. division yet, right? You don't have Space Station, you don't have Dark Zero, but you do have these up and coming players. A lot of the guys on a lot of the teams are still 18, 19. So I think it's going to be an amazing development league to start, and then once we get really going, maybe 2 more seasons or so, I think then we're going to start seeing some big orgs come on over and support these guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the way I look at it, is that, right now, probably, like you said, grassroots a little smaller because it is brand new. And anytime you start something new that's localized or limited to a particular region that isn't as big as the United States or like Europe or Southeast Asia, you're going to have a little different quality. But over time, I mean, all esports is growing. They're all trending up. The players are becoming better because they're figuring out the game more and more and more. So, yeah, awesome there. Transitioning a little bit, talk about a little bit what you do on that day-to-day basis in, organizing these tournaments and hosting tournaments, what it looks like, what you put your emphasis on. So when you do give back to the community, it's at the best quality that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is you got to build the right team, right? So just as if you were playing, it's the same thing organizing or owning a team or this or that, right? You got to build yourself the right team around you to really support any decision. And, if they see something that's iffy, well, they're not going to be just because you own the league or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, that's great. They'll really challenge every point you make. And I did that, right? I got some amazing guys. Nick was one of them. And, from there, it's just really marketing and growing that community, because to be able to give back to the community, you got to have a community, right? So a lot of my day to day is just Discord, making sure everyone's doing okay. Obviously planning with all the staff and certain events and things like that. But my biggest thing is to be active, right? I mean, you need to be a voice and a face within the scene, so that when someone sees the MishMash logo, they can know who to come to, right? So I ask that all my staff, represent the org, and that way we can just go from there. Everyone knows where to go. Everyone knows who to talk to with a problem or a suggestion or concern. And we're open to that, right? If a player suggests something and we like the idea, we'll do everything we can to implement it.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more, is that, building and fostering these communities within esports is what I think one of the most beautiful aspects of esports is that, there are a ton of great people out there that
Yeah.
just want a platform to talk on, right? They might not be the most sociable person in real life, and esports gives them that platform to communicate with their friends across any distance, right? You can talk to someone from Europe, Asia, doesn't matter, right? Esports is without borders
Yeah.
for the most part, especially in online play, besides some ping issues, which,
Yeah.
plague all gamers. Sadly, the fix for that hasn't come out yet. I don't think it ever will.
We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, absolutely love to see the community. And then on the specifically to the hosting tournaments, do you implement any like particular practices in that for like either production or streaming or the quality of the tournament that you think sets you apart from other TOs?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we started, like I said, right, 3 guys sitting in our apartment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just me now, but and it was on console, so we were limited in terms of production value and everything. And then, despite getting a PC and everything, we really wanted to keep console alive. And all it did was add a ton of a ton of different options, right? You get a capture card,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you have all these opportunities. And we did that. So I think what sets us apart is production. We've been working with some absolute geniuses behind the scenes, and just every season we get a little bit better, and in terms of scheduling, actual live action, what you see, replay systems, things like that. So and that's Siege specifically, right? We do other games. We have done Call of Duty, Fortnite, Apex, all these other great games, but our focus is definitely Siege. And now with the new spectator system coming out and things like that, it's just helping us.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I would say is transparency. It doesn't get much more easier than that. If something happens and the players don't seem to know why, you got to tell them. I
Exactly.
think for everyone to be on the same page and to know what's going on, it's just going to make my life as a TO and all my staff's life much easier if everyone's aware of what happened, and that way we don't repeat the same mistake again. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I think any approach in anything, especially in esports, like mistakes are going to be had because it is so new, right? No one knows the right answer. That's why we're all trying to create something special and unique, because that's just what you have to do when something's brand new to really have a great product or a great service or a tournament or host or whatever for the players, which is ultimately what we're all here
Yeah.
for. So couldn't agree more. Question that popped up there was something with transparency and the game development, and it kind of sparked an idea in my head, is that, for the production, the tournament hosting, it's really important to have that transparency from the devs themselves, so you can like get new systems like the replay system, right? Get the recording system as well, that you can go back and watch VODs, which is really key for these teams not only get better, but also from a production standpoint. So speak to something like in the future that you hope to see change or become more transparent or better, in particular with Siege, so that TOs and producers and streamers can get an even better tournament quality from that production standpoint.
Well, I don't know if it would ever be possible, but I like the question, because something that I think that all video games should be able to do is really allow for in-game overlays. Right now, all overlays are pretty much third-party, right? Unless you're a programmer, but even then, you can't reprogram the game, so it's not available in-game. On PC, you can edit the team names for Siege, right? But in console, it remains blue team and orange team, and you have to have third-party overlays to really show the team names and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just a small adjustment of allowing editing team names on console would be great. But really, if Ubisoft themselves were able to develop a universal overlay for within Siege, that if you wanted it to be hosting a comp match or a custom match, you can just put up something basic. I think that would allow for a lot more grassroots programs to pop up, because I think right now there's a lot of people that don't have the resources necessarily. But if you could do that from your PlayStation, well, you could have top level production, and
Mm-hmm.
that'd be amazing, right? You wouldn't need all this other stuff. And I'm a true believer in that. The more leagues, the more community ran events, the better, right? It's only going to develop players, develop the scene, grow the community, and that's better for everybody. So.
Yeah, that part there I couldn't agree with more, because the way I look at it, it's like I started playing baseball when I was 3 years old, right? And community tournaments, t-ball, coach pitch,
Yeah.
little league, like you play all throughout your childhood. But like with dedicated esports, like you might start when you're 15 or 16, like really like with that clear path in your head, in your mind, with a dedicated game, dedicated approach on a team in high school or whatever. But you lose out in 12, 13 years. Now, obviously, some games you can't play when you're 5.
Yeah.
But the same idea is that you lose a lot of exposure to some of those games. So 100% there. And then with the in-game overlays, that's something that I hope to see as a producer myself.
Yeah.
That it just becomes tricky, because then even with the third-party stuff, sometimes it's off by a pixel, and you're like,
right,
just go in and change it, live fix it, and all of a sudden, like that little tiny difference makes a huge difference for the viewers. And then all of a sudden, like, you lose out on your brand because they're like, oh, they didn't take the time. It's like, well, it's not really my fault. It's the way it is. Like,
that's it, right? A lot of people don't see what goes on behind the scenes, so that's really the bread and butter of producing.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, having transparency, even then only goes so far, I think, because some players will just shut you off. And it's like, hopefully sometimes, like, the awareness starts to raise itself, where all of a sudden these players are like, okay, I understand what's going on behind the scenes. It's not easy by any means. These people are really putting in a lot of really great work. And sometimes the ball doesn't roll your way, especially in new esports titles that don't have a finished viewership spectator system at all. Right? We know, I mean, not to talk down on Ubisoft or Rainbow, but their spectator client bugs out sometimes. Most games do, but it's just the way it is, and you have to deal with it. So yeah, 100% there. Looking towards the future of MishMash gaming, right? You can speak to whatever you want here, because it's a little bit of an ambiguous question. What do you hope to see that next big change to be with MishMash gaming, to get you guys to that next level, to go from 3 guys in an apartment to a really great org that really supports their players and etc.?
I think the transition is already happening, in all honesty. I slightly mentioned before that I'm now alone as an owner, but my staff continues to grow, and the dedication from that staff continues to grow. So I think the transition in us to being the 3 guys in the apartment to something much bigger is happening, right? A business transitioning is always a lengthy affair, unless you're Bill Gates or something and you can do it like that. But what we're going to look for, exactly, right? What we're definitely going to look for is more of maybe not a financial gain, but more of a financial investment from either other parties, from ourselves, from other staff, maybe even bringing in some new owners to give me a hand. But we're really going to crack down on the financial aspect of MishMash, and then we'll feel that we'll be able to give back even more and support maybe more teams. We do have a lot of despite being known as tournament hosts, we actually do have a lot of teams as well, right? So we'd love to be able to support more teams and fly people to lands and all this fun stuff. So I think the financial aspect is what we're going to be focusing on for MishMash, but we'll still run free entry stuff, so no one has to worry.
Never lose out on the OG stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which I love to see in esports too, because I think people try to transition a little too quickly. And then they leave behind like a large part of the community where people just want a fun place to play. That is good quality, both on the tournament side and on the competition side. But yeah, I absolutely love to see it. So speaking about your teams and your players, how do you approach like fostering those teams to their next level, and whatever that level looks like? Do you focus on helping the players in any particular aspect of their performance or outside of the game things? Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I was never the greatest at Siege. So when it comes to helping out my Siege team directly, it's more of just I'm a resource for them. Whatever they need, if they need help finding scrims, I will sub and stand in scrims and tryouts from time to time. But for me, it's really just to be available for these guys. These guys are pouring hours and hours and hours in. And sometimes they, just as much as they need a sub, they need someone just to talk to. I don't want to say a shoulder to cry on, but, just someone to vent to sometimes. So I just try and be that person. I'm just trying to be there for all my teams and all my players.
Yeah, 100%. I always say that, having that support staff goes a long way beyond just a coach or an analyst. Having a support staff, team managers, an owner that's always on your side goes a long way. So speak to something about that importance that you've experienced with your experience in dealing with all these players, that you've seen that presence of the support staff that you have readily affect one of your team or one of your players or teams in general.
I actually got the perfect example for this. So something I did actually myself, and it's happening as we speak right now. A member on my PC team, his graphics card got fried. He lives in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
So we have a game the next day or the next week, and it's like, oh, what do? We don't have a sub. We can't really run a tryout. We're not want to remove him from the roster. Luckily enough, I had a graphics card. I was at Canada Post the next day, and I shipped him a $800 graphics card. Never would ask for anything in return or anything like that, because again, him playing on my team already helps me a million, and losing that one player, I mean, a graphics card that's sitting there, while some people might see it as gold, I see it as just being able to help someone out, right? So that's one example. There's plenty. I got to give a shout out to my man Trent. He's one of my head staffs from New Hampshire, and if somebody asks, he's there. Whether it, like I said, personal, professional, whatever it be, he's there, and he probably does double the hours I do. So I just got to give a quick shout out to him.
Yeah. Shout out to Trent. Yeah, I would love to see that too, because like you said, there's that difference between viewing something with monetary value and then like actual inherent value in helping someone achieve what they want, right? And I think that itself was worth way more than that monetary value, whatever it does look like. So that's incredible, to say the least there. Kind of looking towards the future of esports in general, right? Like, you've been heavily involved in the scene and hosting the tournaments, having the teams. What's like some major trends that you either hope to see change or continue to bring esports from this really big booming industry to the biggest competition in all the different games in the world?
That's a good question. So when you look at esports, you think of the biggest games in esports. You think of League of Legends, Dota, which is one of the oldest games and still the biggest esports, right? If we're talking Siege specifically, I think the community is going to have an amazing role in this, right? The community has to not only continue to grow, but continue to mature a little bit. And Siege gets a bad rap for being a toxic community, but there's going to be bad eggs everywhere, right? So I think as long as the community stays involved, we had the U.S. division draws last night, and it was amazing. Lots of enthusiasm from casters and hosts. So I think as long as that Ubisoft and now Face It continues to develop those types of enthusiastic streams and casts, Siege will continue to grow. Year after year at Invitational specifically, we see record numbered viewers. You saw it live for yourself this year, and I mean, the stadium gets bigger and bigger and more packed, and more people and more merch, and more third parties, more sponsors. So I don't see Siege going anywhere in the long time. There's a debate right now whether it's T2 or T1. I'd say it's somewhere in the middle, right? There's some things that they gotta just change it slightly, and they're by far T1. In our hearts, they're Tier 1. They're the best in Tier 1. But I think there's a couple things that they got to change, and they'll be Tier 1. But I'm going to put all my eggs in the community basket, and them really just dedicating themselves to the game.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more there, especially with the Tier 1, Tier 2 with esports, with Siege in particular in relation to esports, is that, to me, it's almost the time of the year. Because I think like the last month or so, I mean, most games kind of dropped down a little bit because of COVID and everything. There was no fun lands, nothing like that. But I remember after SI, especially the last one of 2020, was I left there and I'm like, oh my Jesus, like this is insane, right? This is what a Tier 1 esport feels like. And Siege was the biggest game talked about for probably the next 2 or 3 weeks. It outbeat CS, League, Dota, exactly. All this stuff was about Siege in particular. Went down a little bit after, but something out of the community's control. But even on that community point of, there's always those bad eggs. Couldn't agree more. There's always those toxic people. But I think every scene has that somewhat aspect to it. And that's probably one of my last questions for you is, have you ever experienced toxicity in your leagues? And if so, how do you address it to make sure that you still provide that really positive environment to try to get those bad eggs out of the pot, so to say?
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, I mean, you can't throw everyone under the bus here, but dealing specifically with console a lot of the times, right, it tends to be a younger generation. So 14, 15 year olds do make their way into the league, and we allow them to play. Of course, everybody's welcome, but you do see that lack of maturity, or they shout out things that they just feel that they need to shout out at random times, or they write things in Discord they feel they need to write. We're understanding of the fact that a lot of these guys maybe aren't 18, 19, have full-time jobs, and just experience that different level of everyday life yet. but we do also respect the competitive integrity of not only MishMash, but of Siege in general. So we run a pretty tight ship. If one little mess up, you're okay. Depending on the gravity of that mess up,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, just check yourself before you wreck yourself, and we won't have a problem. But I mean, when it comes down to it, if you're completely, making us look like we're uninvolved or not really moderating properly, at that point, we're going to have to unfortunately drop the ban. And we do experience it a lot less often now, I will say, as we get more established and we get more interest from older and maybe even bigger community ran organizations. A lot of that has been weeded out. So that was the goal, right? We started with
Mm-hmm.
tournaments because we knew what we were getting ourselves into, and we only started leagues 2 years down the line because we figured by that point we knew a good amount of the teams, and
Mm-hmm.
so it was a good transition. But it's something everyone's got to deal with for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's that so prevalent. But I do see a lot. Some people deal with it better than others. Like you said, you can't let it fly underneath the radar because then it starts to cycle and spin out of control, and all of a sudden it's boom. But obviously, you guys aren't by any means. Speaking about the younger generation, this leads me into my last question because unfortunately we are running out of time on this fantastic conversation. The younger generation, what advice would you have for them? In dealing with the tournaments, the leagues, hosting all of those, and having your own teams and players. What advice would you have for an aspiring, say, 14, 15-year-old freshman in high school to bring their game to the next level? What should they focus on? What any approach or perspective that you think can really help them bring their game to that next level?
I came from traditional sports, right? I was a huge soccer player when I was a kid, and I think a lot of those values I learned there transitioned to esports. Just specific, practice times, proper etiquette, just the basics, right? That all transitions to esports. So if I didn't make a team or I got cut from a team, I didn't never play soccer again. I worked my butt off. I practiced even more, and I tried out. Just because a team says no doesn't mean you're not the right fit for another team at the same level. So my biggest advice to kids coming up is definitely don't give up. Your parents might see it as video games, and it is video games, but at the end of the day, there are millions and millions of people all over the world that make careers out of it, and you could be that next big streamer or that next bolo or the next faker in League of Legends. There's tons of things that you could become within video games, but it's really important that you keep the values that you learn as a kid in traditional sports or even just school, right? I mean, you have a schedule, you keep to that schedule, and you just keep the same work ethic all along, and you find yourself a pretty good career in your sports, I think.
Yeah, exactly. There was one word in there, 2 words, work ethic.
Yeah.
That's something I always preach is because if you have the work ethic, success will come, right?
Yeah.
Dedicate yourself, and I think good things will come 100%. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Tyler, go ahead, plug yourself, say bye to the audience, tell us where we can find yourself and MishMash Gaming if we want to play in any of your tournaments or leagues or just follow your teams on their road to success.
Yeah, I think the best way to get in contact with us is definitely just check out our Twitter. It's at @Mish_Mash Gaming. From there, you can enter our Discord, and then the floodgates open. Everything's in Discord. So any game, anything else, along with announcements for when our teams are playing and things like that, the league is live. So that's the best bet. Just come be a part of the community and stay involved.
Awesome. I always say, esports is full of people like Tyler that would love to just sit down and talk or,
Yeah, absolutely.
your perspective. So I would say never hesitate to reach out to all the viewers out there. Stay healthy, stay happy, and ultimately stay plugged in.